He says that one day, so it was customary for the believers, when Baha'u'llah was freed from prison, or before he went to the prison, in different towns, whether it was in Adrianople, whether it was in Baghdad, whether it was in Akka even. Sometimes the believers would invite Baha'u'llah, and occasionally he would accept that invitation to go and visit them. And there, of course, they would prepare a food or a simple tea or something. Even in the barracks of Akka, in the very prison of Akka, when restrictions were relaxed in that prison, the believers who had their quarters in separate places, they sometimes would put together all the little rations they had, and they would prepare a very nice, or relatively nice, shall we say, refreshments, and would beg Baha'u'llah to come to them and take part in that. And Baha'u'llah sometimes would accept and would go. One of these believers says that when he was in Akka, when he was in Bahji, Baha'u'llah accepted their invitation to come to their little room. And one day he came. And then after some time that he sat there and he talked, and then he went back. And he said, as Baha'u'llah left our place, he said, he told us not to follow him. He said, stay where you are. And he and some of those who were accompanying him went. He said, I looked from the back of Baha'u'llah, and I saw the majesty, which is indescribable majesty. An indescribable majesty that he could not describe it from the back. In fact, some people see the majesty of a person from his back. I know that. My wife does that anyhow. She is very much in love with the picture of Abdul Baha, that you can see his back. And he thinks, she loves that picture more than anything else. To see the majesty of walk. This man says, I saw the majesty of Baha'u'llah. And he says to himself, oh, I wish the kings and rulers were here to see that majesty. The next day when he goes into the presence of Baha'u'llah, this man, when Baha'u'llah, as soon as Baha'u'llah sees him and tells him to be seated, he turns to him and he said, if the kings and rulers come today here, who would let you in this place? There would be no room for you here. You people wouldn't be allowed to come here then. If the kings and rulers were coming into the faith, who would let you in? He says, this is your day. This is the day of the meek and the humble. He says the kings and rulers will come in the future. So really and truly, we must thank Baha'u'llah for having given us this great revelation and has enabled us to recognize him in this day. It's a great, great bounty. The more you think of it, the more you look at the history of the faith, the history of his revelation, the more you realize what a great day it is and what a bounty which is indescribable that he has given to us. So now you know whose words you're reading. You can see a little bit of the ocean. That like the drop who saw the ocean. If you really dwell upon these subjects, read the dispensation of Baha'u'llah, read those few pages at the back of the Advent of Divine Justice, read the history of his revelation, we get a little glimpse of that. It's entirely up to us. Whenever we are moved, we say a prayer. You can now stand up and say a prayer here. That's all right. Or go at home and say a prayer whenever you like it. But the obligatory prayers is a law of Baha'u'llah, and we must say it in the manner which is prescribed. And it is this which makes it sound to us as foreign. Because Baha'u'llah has given, enjoined upon us certain genuflections in this prayer, in this rite. As you know, there are 3 types of obligatory prayers, or 4 types really. 3 of them are for the living, and 1 of them is for the dead. One of the obligatory prayers which we say for the dead, in which there is a refrain, there are some refrains that you keep on repeating. That's an obligatory prayer. It's not just an ordinary prayer. If there is a Baha'i funeral, that is a must. The others doesn't matter if you say a prayer, other prayers or not, it doesn't matter. But that is an essential part of the ritual of burying the dead, of the funeral. Baha'u'llah has forbidden the saying of obligatory prayers in public. You have to say it in private, in the privacy of your own room. Whereas that of the dead, that for the dead, you can say it in public. The obligatory prayers, as you know, there are 3 of them. One of them is the long obligatory prayer, which is a very beautiful prayer. And one of them is the medium one, and one of them is the short one. The long one, of course, you say it once in every 24 hours. The medium one, you say it 3 times a day, certain times, morning, noon, night. The shortest one, which is the simplest of all, really, it's a very simple thing, and Baha'u'llah, through his bounty, has been very, very kind to us. To some businessmen who are so busy they have no time for these things, they can say it at noon if they remember it. And he says if they forgot it, they could go up to sunset. So it's quite a good extension for them. It's only 2 lines. You remember that. And there is no genuflections either. But it is an obligatory prayer. It's one of the rituals of the faith. But the other ones have some genuflections. Now there are conditions for saying the obligatory prayer, as I said. One of the conditions is that you must be alone. Why must you be alone? You will see in a few minutes when I explain this to you. When we talk about these genuflections, these actions that you do, that really this is a place for doing it between you and your God. There can be no other person there. Because there you are going to prostrate yourself in front of your God. You see? And you are going to confess throughout the whole of the prayer to our own shortcomings, to our sins, to our transgressions, to our remoteness from Him. Beg Him to bring us close to Him. And these are the things which are very private. The only occasion that I would consider, and this is my personal view and experience, that you can say it when there is somebody else there, is when your children are there. I feel parents should say the obligatory prayers in front of their children, so that they take it as an example. We learnt it anyhow as Baha'i children. When most people who have been brought up in the East, in Baha'i families, you will ask them, they say, yes, when I was 10 years of age, I memorized it because I've heard it so much every day. It becomes a part of you then. One of the conditions for saying the obligatory prayers is that you must turn your face towards the Qibla, which is the shrine of Baha'u'llah. The whole world turns to Him. It's the tremendous thought that all mankind, and eventually the whole of the human race, one day, when they all recognize Him, they all will turn. Just like to the hub of the wheel, everyone. And this brings unity. Everyone turns to the shrine of Baha'u'llah, wherever you are. Now these genuflections that must go with it, with the long and the medium obligatory prayers, they are symbolic. Baha'u'llah has tried to add to our words, which are, for instance, you're supplicating to God something. Supplicating means you're begging Him to do something for you. And He has introduced these symbolic actions. You raise your hand when you supplicate to God. When you want to express your humility to Him, utter humility and utter nothingness to who? To God, to your Creator. Not to man, but to Creator. That's why you're alone. You prostrate yourself before your God. And you say those words indicating your utter nothingness and your humility before Him. And that raises our consciousness with these actions. of what we are really saying to our God. We are doing it, we are showing it in action. It heightens one's consciousness of the words, provided we can understand this. Well, so you see how important this is to us. The obligatory prayers, to become used to become familiar with it, and knowing it's not something which is done in the public, but you do it in private. Baha'u'llah and Abdul Baha have told us that if the believers do not say their obligatory prayers, they can never get close to Baha'u'llah. No matter what else you do, this is one of those conditions. And we Baha'is in the West have to become used to this. I know some people in the West now, at least the countries that I've been familiar with, particularly in Ireland. I know many, many believers in Ireland. I know believers who will never go to bed unless, even if it's midnight, dead tired, and the woman or man thinks he hasn't said his prayers, obligatory prayers, he says now, he must say it. With this we can grow. So you see, this is another point which I wanted to bring up. For we were trying to enable our faith to grow, wasn't it? The whole idea was to see what should we do that our faith may grow. Well, this is the second step, really. Or the first step. This should be the first step. And reciting the writings become the second step. But they are of similar nature. Now prayers, we can say when you like it. And then comes the study of the writings. Now study of the writings and reciting the writings are two different things. We must not confuse them. Because when you recite the writings in the morning and in the evening, you are really taking your personal food, your spiritual food. Although you learn from it as well, I'm sure you learn a lot of things. But the purpose of it is not to learn things. When you're reciting the words, the purpose is to receive the spiritual food. This is the communication receiving from your Creator. And you are eating your spiritual food. But studying of the writings is a different thing. You have to sit down, take a book, read the writings, see what it says, what it means. Read another book to understand this part that you don't understand. Ask from somebody a question, what does this mean? Read the history of the faith. Join these things together, go and make research, ask from people, take part in seminars. This is where we study the writings. And the more we do that, the study of the writings will enable us to see more and more of the greatness of that ocean I was telling you. The ocean of the revelation of Baha'u'llah. If you want to see that ocean like the drop did, you remember the drop of the rain when it saw the ocean. If you want to see that, you have to study the writings. And one of the very important things we must study are the words of Shoghi Effendi. Because Shoghi Effendi plays a very, very significant part in the revelation of Baha'u'llah. And I will explain to you what his position is in relation to the words. It's a very significant role that he has played. If you had been a very knowledgeable Bahai, now I had seen some very knowledgeable Baha'is who had come from the East, who had read great many of the writings of Baha'u'llah. And by the way, let me say this much, that I don't think there is anybody in the world, anybody who can say he has read all the writings of Baha'u'llah and Abdul Baha and Shoghi Effendi. We certainly do not have such a person. You can't keep it in your mind anyhow, except Mr. Anderson. He has got all the indexing done, and he's marvelous, really marvelous. But you'll forget it, and you read it, and you will have to. There's nobody who can say he has read everything. I was so delighted to see Ted here. I'd met him about 12 years ago in Canada, and it was a very beautiful experience to go and see him. And now it was great joy to see him at the airport when I arrived. You know, I'm going to miss you all when I'm going there to Europe. How am I going to do it? I don't know. It's such a beautiful experience to come and meet with all the beautiful faces here, and it was a great privilege and joy for me to see today some of your early believers, the first believer and the first native believer. you do not realize who they are. Of course, they are the most humble servants of Baha'u'llah. But history will record this in the future. And I'm sure the historians will want to know who were these people, what were they like, what they were doing. And the same thing with all of you, with all pioneers in every town, those who pioneer from town to town. And they go there and establish the foundation of the community in the future. They are not going to find out who were our politicians and our great figures in history as we call them today. These days that we are going through are the darkest period in the history of mankind. You realize this? The darkest period that ever was or that ever shall be is the period that now we are in it, and we shall be in it for quite a few years. The darkest period of man's life. And people will not want to know who were these people who were running for election. You run in here for elections. In England they stand for elections. You know that. This is the difference. You run and there they stand for it. But anyhow, all these things will be considered as so much part of the old order. But what will be remembered is the wonderful band, a small band or a lonely person of Baha'is who have been in localities and places and towns, villages, far, far remote areas of the world, trying to build up, and they built up eventually, and we will build up great, great institutions for mankind. And then they want to know who are these people? Who were these people? And if they find a little scrap of paper, if they ever come across it that there is a little information about that, they are going to grab it from each other to know something about you people. So really we are very, very privileged to be inheriting the kingdom of God, the weak and the humble, inheriting this great kingdom. Well, we are talking of other things now. The time is coming to an end, and I feel that we should consider these 2 points that I have mentioned today about our ways by which we can grow spiritually, get closer to Baha'u'llah. And if you are going to be with us tomorrow, I'm going to say something to you that, and I'll leave it with you to think about it, that if you read the writings and if you say your prayers in this way, the obligatory prayers, and turn to Baha'u'llah, this is not going to be sufficient. We have to do other things. This is not the end of it. We have to do other things as well. And particularly, I'm going to mention something tomorrow which if you don't do it, then all the things that you have done will be of no use. And these things are so close together. Now don't let it be a cliffhanger or something till tomorrow, but let us wait, and we hope that we can continue in this series. There are some questions people have asked in here which are not considered, which is not part of this, but I want to also bring up some other points as well, which is not to do with this, how we enable our faith to grow, but other subjects which are part of it again. And we hopefully will bring it up tomorrow. Now there is only 10 minutes left, or something like that. And I think you should say something now, if you want to. If there is any questions or some points that you want to raise. Yes?
Well, because we've gone all the way without questions, I have to do more than 25. Can you explain a little more what you mean by praying without desire? I came across your statement on that, and something you wrote very similar to what you're saying now. And I never understood that. In fact, up until that point, I thought, gee, well, here it is. I've never seen it all laid out so well. How you actually acquire Bahai characteristics of the life, acquire sort of things. So I read that. And I said, well,
no, you see,
praying without desire. Well, I don't know what that means. So
now, I'll explain this to you as best as I can. First of all, you can pray in any way you like, with all the desires in the world that you have in it. There's nothing wrong with this. We mostly, when we pray, we want something. You're in difficulties, you pray. And Baha'u'llah, in fact, and Abdul Baha have left for us many such prayers, in which we read and we beg God for various things. But what I was trying to say was that if a person grows spiritually and becomes more and more closer to Baha'u'llah, he reaches a point that he doesn't want anything for himself. It's not something that you must do it now, but it's a matter of growth. That all that you want is to praise God. All that you want is to turn to Him, is to glorify Him. But it's only a matter of growth. It is not a matter of compulsion that now, from now on, we must go and pray without any desire. We can't do it. And this is why Baha'u'llah and Abdul Baha have known our weaknesses. And all these prayers that you have, which says, oh God, I am in need, I am in this way, I am in that way, give me this, give me that. It's all because of our weaknesses. That when you become stronger, you don't want anything but the cause of God to grow, but to get closer to God. And this is the meaning of prayer without desire.
That's what I was wondering. Desire in the sense of desiring the presence of God.
Yes.
That's not what you're talking about.
No.
Desiring the nearness of God is
Yes.
always something.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Is it permissible to instruct children on the obligatory prayers like in a children's class?
Well, surely you can teach them, but they are not obliged to say it. They cannot say it until, or they shouldn't say it until they are 15. The age of 15 is an age in which Baha'is will attain the age which becomes binding on them to carry out the laws of Baha'u'llah. But it's a good thing for them to know that they can say it, they must say it when they grow older. Now how you can instruct them, yes, but they must know it's not a part of their life then until they become 15. There and then here. I'll just...
Could you finish up briefly why we should read the writings of Shoghi Effendi?
Oh yes, that was a subject I meant to say and I forgot it. But it's too late now. Well, I'll mention... Right. That's an important thing. Let us finish that one. Would you like me to do this? Yes. You see, this is a very important point. I said I've met many believers who are very deep in the faith, who had read the writings of Baha'u'llah, as many as they could find. So much they have read practically all the writings of Abdul Baha. They have known all the history of the faith. They were the most erudite Baha'is we could have, the most knowledgeable. But they really didn't understand the faith. Until Shoghi Effendi came in. Now the best way I can explain it to you is like this. If you read all the writings of Baha'u'llah and Abdul Baha alone and all the history of the faith, you will not understand the faith necessarily. I will give you this example. You see, Baha'u'llah, have you seen these boxes which you give to children as gift called jigsaw puzzles? Now when you look at the jigsaw puzzle, you will find it has a lot of pieces in it. And as you look at each piece is valid, isn't it? It's valid piece. It's valid, it's truth. It's good, it's right. But you look at each piece, they are not related to each other so much. And so you have a box full of items which are right and good and valid. But where is that picture? Now the faith is like that. Baha'u'llah and Abdul Baha have given us all the truths that we want to have. All the truth of this faith they have brought for us. They have given to us like this box, full of it. Now, the function of Shoghi Effendi during the 36 years of his ministry was to put this together for us and give us a picture of what it is all about, relate them together. He related all that Baha'u'llah and Abdul Baha had brought together and said, this is the Baha'i faith. Now, he never added one dot to the... Now, this is one thing that some of the friends may not realize. People think that Shoghi Effendi has given us his own views in the faith. and added so many things to it. Not at all. Shoghi Effendi has not added one dot to the revelation of Baha'u'llah. All that he has done, he has explained to us, elucidated that as the interpreter of the Word of God, applied it for us. He put together really all that the faith had. He explained to us the function of various elements in the faith, the relationships together, how the laws should be applied, how the teachings should be applied. This is his function. And therefore, not until you read the writings of Shoghi Effendi can you fully appreciate the faith. This is why I said that we had great learned men during the heroic age of the faith, before Shoghi Effendi comes into the scene, who had known all the writing, or some of the writings, a great deal of it. They were very learned people, beautiful people, very spiritual giants, as I call them, really. But really, when you look at it, they had not understood the whole perspective of the faith. In its perspective, they hadn't seen it. And it was Shoghi Effendi who gave it to us. And to me, this is the greatest task that he performed for us. He put together what Baha'u'llah and Abdul Baha brought to us. He formed it, he showed it to us, and he said, this is it. And he gave us the pattern. Now, this is why I feel it's so important for us, if we want to understand the faith, to read his writings. Half of his writings are in English, and half of it are in Persian. But what you have in English is quite sufficient to give us his guidance, and then you can read But so really, when you become a Baha'i, you enter into a field, of a vast field, which has no end to it. No Baha'i can say, well, I have exhausted it now, I'm glad I'm finished, I'm going to retire. You can't do that. As long as we live, we still have scope to read the writings of Baha'u'llah and understand a little bit of it, read the writings of Abdul Baha, read the writings of Shoghi Effendi, read the history of the faith. And I can literally tell you, if you want to take it seriously, you have no time to read anything else. You won't have the time to read the books that people write about the faith either. You won't have the right time. It's impossible to read all the books that people write about the faith. You can't do that. You have no time for it. You have no time unless in the future again a machinery is created for us which can condense all things in one flash and push it into your mind. Maybe this is something in future people might do it for us. But I cannot believe that you can do all of this. It's impossible to read all these writings and then try to see what other people think of. And then there is another aspect to it, the writings. And I mention this to you, and some of you may be surprised to hear this. If you read the writings of Baha'u'llah and Abdul Baha and Shoghi Effendi, you don't need to read anything else. You will understand everything. And of course, I'm not saying you shouldn't learn science and technology. Baha'u'llah says we must learn science and technology and all the sciences and arts. But all those knowledges that people acquire, which begins with word and ends with word, will be useless for you. Because here have all the answers to every question that you want is here. And maybe tomorrow we will also talk about this aspect of knowledge and learning a little bit. So now I think we must close the session really, because of the time is so short. But maybe we can...
I had two alternatives. One, the seeming contradiction, if you go to the book sales committee and buy a ring, the right price, with the diamond symbol, sometimes in the package you get a little folded up instruction by one hand cause how to wear this and so on. I think I believe a little bit, but anyway, the right hand. If you read, I'm not sure it's a tablet of Baha'u'llah or whether it's part of the West or something, but Abdul Baha says in the last because it's closest to the heart. Do you think this is bad translation or not?
So what is the heart? What is closest to the heart? I didn't hear it.
The little finger on the left hand.
Oh yeah.
Closest to the heart.
Well, yes, these are probably the things. I think these are not essential things at this present time for us to go and follow. There are some things which will gradually become established when the House of Justice finds us the time they'll instruct us, and all these things. These are secondary things. Well, friends, I hope that you haven't been very tired today. I'll collect all these. If you had also cared, you could write some of your questions. Would be all right. I can collect them in here, and this way I could maybe formulate it in the talks tomorrow. I understand that some of you may not be here on Monday, so that we will try tomorrow to bring in a good deal of the things which I feel may be of some help, if it is of any help. So, with your permission, we'll end up this meeting. No, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Well, friends, your love and your beautiful faces have so affected me since yesterday that I feel moved to pray to Baha'u'llah that this community may become a jewel in the whole Bahai world, really, because you are jewels. I mentioned yesterday or day before how much the early believers at the time of Baha'u'llah would have longed to see one of you who have embraced his faith in the Western world, especially in all these remote areas. And I know that your country has a great destiny. Someone was telling us at the National Assembly meeting here that the people of this country, and probably Ireland, are the people who will, the countries who will bring great numbers into the faith in the Western world. And I hope very much that this will happen. You know, the powers of earth and heaven are working for us to promote the faith, provided we arise and provided we turn to Baha'u'llah. Once we turn to ourselves, then nothing will happen. Once you rely on yourself, nothing will happen. But if you turn to him and rely on him and bring him with you, then all kinds of things will happen. And time is short, really. The world is set for great upheavals and sufferings which will encompass mankind. And during this short period of time, we have to prepare ourselves for the time that great numbers are going to knock on our doors in the middle of night and tell us, now we know what you were saying. Please tell us what should we do. We have to prepare ourselves for that day, because that day will come. You know, the world conditions will deteriorate. There is no doubt about it. This is what Baha'u'llah has said over 100 years ago. Baha'u'llah said that if the believers, if his believers, those of his time who had recognized him, if they had carried out his teachings with absolute sincerity and faithfulness, then the whole world, the great majority of the world, would have recognized Baha'u'llah in his day. But this did not happen. And so now we have to bear the consequences of mankind's failure to recognize him, and the leaders of the world the message of Baha'u'llah fell on deaf ears when they received it. All of these consequences will result in the breaking up of this old order. And day by day, as Baha'u'llah has mentioned, day by day, the conditions will become worse. It's not something which will become worse month by month, but day by day. That today will be worse than yesterday. And this is our experience also. We can see it with our own eyes. From every point of view. Morally, spiritually, socially, economically, politically, society will break up, and is breaking up at a terrific speed, until what Baha'u'llah has said will become fulfilled. And then he said that suddenly, he uses the word suddenly, suddenly that will happen which will cause the limbs of mankind to quake. That is a tremendous upheaval which will face us all. And from what Shoghi Effendi has written, it's not going to be a small thing. The limbs of mankind, the whole human society will quake. And then Baha'u'llah gives us the vision of what happens after that. Immediately after that. And not after that, but immediately after that. Because he says, then and only then. Then and only then. I paraphrase his words, will the divine standard be unfurled, and the nightingales will warble their melodies, which means there and only then the cause of God will be widespread over the world. It will be proclaimed and great numbers will come into the faith. We have to prepare ourselves for that day. And our institutions which we are building today are going to be those institutions which are going to guide humanity as torches, he says. These will become beacons of light which will guide humanity at the time of its greatest peril. Now, we are not going to go into this subject now. I didn't mean to talk about this particular aspect. And we know that the institutions of the faith, the cause of God is protected in all these calamities and sufferings which are to happen. And I believe, and Shoghi Effendi has in fact indicated these things, I believe very firmly that if any believer dedicates himself fully to the progress of the cause, for the advancements of the faith, God will protect him. I'm not saying that we should now go and teach the faith so that we may save our neck in the future difficulties. This is not at all the right motive. Not, far from it. I'm saying this. God will protect the believers so that those who are steadfast in the cause and dedicate yourself. You know, the early believers that I met when I was young, if I tell you this, you may not believe this. They had the power of life and death in their own hands. They had reached to such powers. God had given them such powers that they had the power of life and death. And they used it to protect, to propagate the faith, to enlarge its institutions and its society, communities. This is because they had faith. If you have faith to that extent that we have faith, our powers will be to that extent of your faith. And Baha'u'llah mentions those who have been, who have become detached from the things of this world. And when you become detached, you know, it means that you will become attached to Baha'u'llah. And that's the meaning of it, really. The only barrier we have between us and Baha'u'llah is our attachment to the things of this world. Once we become detached from it, then we will find that the powers of Baha'u'llah will descend upon us. And this is when things will happen. Well, friends, I don't want to talk about this subject at all, but as I said, the marvelous spirit which is created in this meeting, I feel it from yourselves, from you people. And I know that when I return back, I shall be very much uplifted by having met you and having come to your presence. I want to continue the subject we were discussing yesterday. Now, I'm not going to repeat what I have said yesterday, but I feel that those of you who were here, maybe you who were not here, probably you have to bear with me somehow. You remember the 2 points which so far we discussed. And for the soul to grow and to develop and to become closer to Baha'u'llah, for the spirit of faith, when we talked about the spirit of faith, to grow day by day, so that our faith becomes stronger day by day, stronger, so that Baha'u'llah's words become fulfilled when he expects of us that our tomorrow is better than our today. And we pointed out 1 or 2 points that we could help ourselves. And this was the way that Baha'u'llah himself had shown us. We talked about the saying of obligatory prayers, the significance of it. We said how much that the saying of the obligatory prayer makes the soul humble. Really, when you read it carefully and in the presence of God, in the privacy of your own chamber, you read that and you see how humble we become. We become like that drop which I was mentioning yesterday, seeing the ocean. And then great powers can descend on the soul. And then when we read the writings of Baha'u'llah, and we talked about what the writings consisted of, so different from prayers, then great powers again will come. But that's not enough. You know, the story of religion is the story of love. When you say you are a Bahai, you means that we are in love with Baha'u'llah. This is the meaning of it. It's a love story. It's not a story of knowledge. Forget about knowledge. Knowledge is a problem, quite frankly. And we probably talk about this. I'll make sure that I'll talk about this sometime today to you. But love for God, love for Baha'u'llah. We are created to be the lovers. You know, this is the function of man, is to be a lover. And to the extent that we are a lover, to that extent we can enjoy life and we can enjoy living in accordance with the teachings. Now, to be a Bahai means you are a lover of Baha'u'llah. And of course, loving is a relative term. It varies from person to person. We are at different levels here. When you love somebody, the sign of love, a real love, is that you are ready and willing and really longing to do what your beloved asks you to do. Isn't that right? This is a true love I'm talking about. I'm not talking of superficial love that we think somebody may think he has for somebody else. You know, the real love. When you have a real love, you don't want anything for yourself. You realize this? And if you ever want anything for yourself, it means that you are not in love with that person. Now, if you say, oh yes, I love this person because, oh, he's very rich and he's got the cars and houses and business, I love him. This is not love, this is selfishness, you see. But a real love is when you don't want anything for yourself, that you want everything for your beloved. Now here we come to a very important point. When we become a Bahai, and when we love Baha'u'llah, we want to do everything he has asked us to do, to carry out his teachings. And this is a very important point. If I say I love him but I don't carry out his teachings, then it means it's no use. I read the writings, what's the use of it? I say my prayers but I don't obey Baha'u'llah. You see how these things are related together? How one follows the other? You remember yesterday I was telling you it's something like you have to close all the switches which are in series, one after the other, and if one of them is open, no current can go through. You have to close all the switches. Now this is it. we have to be willing and ready and joyous and longing to carry out his teachings. And his teachings is not purely, and his laws, the laws that he has given to us. Now in the Western world, we don't have many laws. Our laws are very few that Baha'u'llah has now given to us. The time will come in the future that we have to carry out more laws, which he has enjoined upon us. But the laws that he has given to us are so few. I mean, I will count them for you. We can count it with the fingers of your hand. Do you know what the first law of Baha'u'llah is, which we are asked to carry out? The most important of these laws? It's a law. And law has precedence over anything else. If there is a law, and if there is a teaching or a saying, the preference comes to the law of Baha'u'llah. I mentioned yesterday, if there was a choice between reading the writings of Baha'u'llah and saying the obligatory prayers, we say the obligatory prayers because it's the law of Baha'u'llah. Now the first and the most important law of Baha'u'llah is the saying of obligatory prayers and fasting. It's required of us. And he mentions, Abdul Baha also mentions, that if we do not do that, we will not be able to get close to him. There is a barrier already. And we have to make this a habit. Let us, all of us here, as our chairman was saying, really determine and try it. I would suggest, and this is of course, I'm mentioning this to the new Baha'is, because the older Baha'is are familiar with this. But I'm mentioning this to newer Baha'is. Let us try this for 3 months. Do it regularly. And regularly read the writings, and then you forget about it. Just remember it for 3 months. That's enough. Then forget about it. All will work out then. You will find it becomes a beautiful picture. You try it. You try it and see how one's life will change. Now, yes, we must, just reading the laws of Baha'u'llah I was talking about. The fasting, obligatory prayers, the law of marriage, Bahai marriage, I'm sure you're all familiar with. The law of prohibition of the drinking of alcohol is one of the laws of Baha'u'llah, which is binding on us. It is time that now, in the Western world, we are able, as Baha'is, and especially the young Baha'is, to stand erect, well-oriented, strong people who will stand up in the public and say, I will not drink because Baha'u'llah has forbidden it. And the same thing applies to the taking of drugs. These are the things we have to be frank with people who become Baha'is and tell them this. They have every right to know this. And then it is, the other one is the question of sexual relations outside marriage. It's forbidden by Baha'u'llah. Outside marriage, before and after. Marriage, he has enjoined upon us. And it is not compulsory, but it's a marvelous thing. When I was about 10 or 12 years ago in Ireland, we had about 150, 200 people became Baha'is in one town. Young people. Young men and young women. They became beautiful Baha'is, strong Baha'is. And they all scattered. We asked them to scatter throughout the country. And now they are the people who have built up the foundations of a new, of all the communities we have there. We have now in the south of Ireland 20 local assemblies. And these people have become the foundations of these assemblies. They have pioneered. They've all of them spread around. And they live recognizing our impotence and our utter nothingness and our humility then you have the makings of a spiritual giant. Servitude, you see, is the greatest station that God has destined for man. There is no greater station than the station of servitude for man. In fact, there are 3 stations, he says, in the world. The station of God, which is above us, the station of the manifestations of God, which is above us, and the station of man is that of servitude. Servitude. And Abdul Baha was the true servant. No person on this earth will ever reach him as low as that in servitude. Because when you go in servitude, you go down, further down, not up. You cannot be a servant and have ambition to become somebody. There is no station for anybody in this faith. And this is a great protection for all of us. If you want to think of a station for somebody, servitude. To be low, to be... Abdul Baha says, make me a dust in the path of thy loved ones. This is true. A dust in the path of loved ones. If ever somebody thinks of saying I, this is a very bad word to use, I. Or my. It's really a bad word. It's the word which has caused all the troubles in the world. But utter nothingness come to us when we see the great ocean of revelation of Baha'u'llah. You cannot artificially become humble. And humility come only to us when we see the greatness of the revelation of Baha'u'llah. Now Abdul Baha became that embodiment of servitude. And he himself begged Baha'u'llah to give him that station when he was a child. When Abdul Baha was a child of about 10 years of age in Baghdad, he had recognized the station of his father. And I mentioned that he recognized it, really recognized who he was. We haven't recognized him. We cannot recognize him. We can only recognize him to a limited degree. Abdul Baha's recognition and the recognition of the Bab as to the station of Baha'u'llah was so complete that it is beyond us. You know that often people think that because Abdul Baha was the son of Baha'u'llah, well, you know how it is between the father and the son. There is always an intimate relationship of intimacy and there is no conventions there. You know, at home when you're alone, you're just very, very relaxed and absolutely free, and there is no restrictions. You're a member of a family, and this is your father, and this is the son, and who knows what the sons these days do to their fathers, and vice versa. But anyhow, we have a very, very intimate relationship. And some people may think that Abdul Baha had the same relationship with his father. But he didn't. Although there was this love between them, naturally. But Abdul Baha had so recognized the station of Baha'u'llah as being the Lord of Lords, as being the manifestation, the supreme manifestation of God, that he considered himself as his humblest servant. He would never, in the ordinary time when everybody was out of the house, he would never give himself the liberty of suddenly walking into the room of Baha'u'llah. He would not go in without getting permission, without prostrating himself at his feet. You see, he had recognized him who he was. It wasn't his heavenly, it wasn't his earthly father. It was God revealed to man. He had recognized that. We haven't recognized it. And therefore he knew what humility meant towards his father. You have heard many stories of Abdul Baha approaching the house in which his father was living, for instance, in the mansion of Bahai. When Abdul Baha was in Akka and he was in the Bahai, you have heard of that story, I'm sure many of you. He used to ride his donkey to go from Akka to the mansion of Bahai. But as soon as he saw the mansion from distance, he would dismount from his donkey, because it is in the conventions of the East, and one of the signs of respect towards your Lord, if you are a servant of somebody, you never go riding to your servant. You must to your Lord. If you are a servant, you never ride to go to see your Lord. You always walk. And so Abdul Baha would dismount from his donkey as a respect towards Just as soon as he saw from 1 mile distance the mansion of Bahji, he would dismount. He would walk. He said he would never go riding to his Lord. And then Baha'u'llah, what a love he had towards Abdul Baha. The outpouring of love and adoration that he had for him was something again out of this world. He often, when he would hear that Abdul Baha is coming to the mansion of Bahji, for example, as soon as he would hear, he would make the whole household and everyone who was around there to be vigilant to see when the master is arriving from distance, and he would send all the men who were there, every person, to go as a welcoming party a mile or two ahead. The master is coming, he said. And he himself would stand on the balcony watching, waiting for the master to come. And those who were with him, usually the female members of the household or some of the disciples who were there, women disciples and who were in that household, he would look to them and say, look at the master, look at the way he walks, look at his majesty, look at his powers, you see. Now this is a love relationship between the two, but one is the Lord and one is the servant. Now one, Baha'u'llah, you can consider him like a summit of a lofty mountain. And Abdul Baha, the lowest servant, the lowest valley. The lowest valley. No one can reach him as low as that. The lowest valley down there. And then when the water pours down from the top of the mountain, where does it accumulate? It accumulates in the lowest valley. And this is how Abdul Baha, you see, one of the distinguishing features of this revelation, and this you have all studied, the covenant, one of the distinguishing features of this revelation is that Baha'u'llah has brought his revelation for us. But unlike the prophets of the past, he never gave it to us. He brought it for us, but he didn't give it to us, his revelation. He gave them to Abdul Baha. This is the meaning of the covenant. All the forces of the revelation of Baha'u'llah, all the forces that he released for 40 years of his ministry, he poured it within the person of Abdul Baha. Abdul Baha became the reservoir of the revelation of Baha'u'llah. It's like this glass in here. This glass contains all the water that is therein. See? Abdul Baha became a container. Baha'u'llah had brought for us two things in this dispensation, and not more and not less. One was his revelation, and one was the person of Abdul Baha. And these two things is all that God has given to mankind in this age. And Abdul Baha became here like a container of the revelation of Baha'u'llah. And although he did not have the powers, although he was not a manifestation of God, he had the powers of the manifestation of God conferred upon him by virtue of containing all that revelation within him. And so what did Baha'u'llah tell us? He says to us this. This is his message. This is the gist of the covenant. He says, everything I have brought for you is with Abdul Baha. Go and get it from him. It is nowhere else. Outside Abdul Baha, nothing exists. It's within him. This is the meaning of the covenant. So you see, because he really received the revelation of Baha'u'llah on behalf of all humanity, and held it there and protected it, just like a wall that you put around an ocean. And it was an ocean of revelation. And that wall, many people tried to break through. The covenant breakers during his ministry. You should study that turbulent history of the faith during those 29 years. They tried to break through this great wall of this ocean and to get to this water of life. But Abdul Baha and a few of the believers who rallied around him like lions, they protected this covenant, this cause. And so they couldn't break through. And today, of course, it's a different story. That wall of the covenant is so strong that it will be foolish to think anybody can even think in terms of breaking through it. It's a tremendous revelation, really. And Abdul Baha and Baha'u'llah here have this reciprocal goal of one complementing the other. bringing to us the revelation of Baha'u'llah. Well, friends, I think we should take a break here, and then I will probably remember some of the things that I have forgotten. We will see. Do you think we can start again?